33 years after his son's murder, Vishal Malhotra won't allow himself to forget. He's kept Vishal's old school reports as well as some of his drawings. This was a child who loved to draw and was clearly very bright.
I don't want to praise him, but it says boy genius. Basically, in the very short period of time, he started doing very well. He was doing boxing, learning the violin, which I still have.
You must have been very proud of him.
I was very, very proud of him. If I had been given an opportunity and to see him grow, I'm sure he would have grown into a very nice, mature, intelligent boy, and probably got Cambridge or Oxford.
Vishal never got that chance. Those old school reports and drawings are in the same file as the newspaper cuttings, an archive that reflects the tragedy of what happened. This story begins on July the 29th, 1981, a day you will remember. It was the day of the royal wedding.
And as the groom now approaches the other members of the royal family and awaits in Dean's Isle her arrival, the bride arrives to the moment.
I was an article clerk and my office was overlooking Fleet Street on the second floor. The wedding procession was supposed to come from St. Paul's Cathedral down Fleet Street.
But today we have the delight of all these children awaiting this great moment as we await it now, as the bride's procession...
And so we decided at the office that we were going to have a office party.
An office family day. Vishal, his sister Mamta and their nanny Janita arrived at Vishambar's office to watch the procession go past.
So all of us, we went with our picnic basket to the office. It must have been about 11ish when we got there. And we were all having a laugh.
Coach, which we can see without periscopes, comes to a stop at the bottom of the steps of St. Paul's. The door opens and for the first time we see in all its glory that dress.
They watched the happy couple go past, flanked as they were by the mounted police and guards. It was a bright, sunny, warm day, and after watching the procession, the Malhotras decided to head home.
I must have left with the kids at about 1 o'clock or 10 past 1, walked down to Temple Station, and which straight goes to East Putney Station. East Putney Station was our local station where we were living.
They went home to prepare for a holiday. The family, including the nanny, were due to fly out to Jersey for a 2-week break. Vishambar says that one or perhaps both of his children had a cough.
And I told Jonita, the nanny, to go and buy some cough syrup. And the children both wanted to go with her because they thought they could get a sweet or chocolate or something, which I gave them, I don't know what, 10, 20p, whatever it was at that time.
Vishal, tired, left.
I went home and literally hit the sack in my bedroom, closed the door, went to sleep, and I must have zonked out.
At 5 o'clock that afternoon, he woke up and asked Juanita where Vishal was. Juanita said she thought he was sleeping in Vishambar's bed.
She said that after having crossed the road, suddenly Vishal decided that he wanted to go back. So she saw him cross the road back and start running towards East Putney Station. When she and Mamta turned around and went to the shop. And that was the last she saw of Vishal.
At what stage did you start panicking?
The panic was already coming there because he was not the type to not inform me or any member of the family if he was to travel anywhere else.
Vishambar says Vishal would have known the route home, crossing Upper Richmond Road, running down Keswick Road, before cutting into Lytton Grove and then Homebush Road where the family home was.
Though it was a very bright sunny afternoon, there were very, very few people and traffic on the roads. So it was a very quiet day.
Not many chances then to spot an 8-year-old Indian boy wearing a white and navy striped t-shirt, black cord trousers, and newspaper reports at the time say blue or white trainers. Those trainers, as you will hear, will become important. The family contacted the police. Vishambar says they were told to wait to see if he came home that night. He didn't.
after that, they did do a thorough search. The Met Police were involved, and they were really, really trying their best to locate him.
The operation grew and grew. Vishal's picture was released and broadcast on television, with any potential witnesses asked to come forward. There were, newspapers say, over 200 reported sightings. Nothing, police said, was being ruled out. But in February 1982, 8 months after the search began, Vishal received a phone call with the worst possible news.
When I got the phone call from the police that they had found the body of Vishal, I broke down completely. I was a zombie for months.
Vishal's body was found buried in a shallow grave near a copse in the village of Rogate in Sussex. 2 pigeon shooters out walking made that discovery. Vishal was missing his pelvis, legs and lower spine. His torso and skull, as well as a clump of matted black hair, were recovered.
You kept on hoping that the police were wrong. You kept on hoping that he would still walk in. You dream about him. You dream about, you want to believe in ghosts at that time, so that at least you can communicate with your son.
Sussex police began a murder investigation, but the case soon went cold. And that was that. There is just one more thing. A phone call taken during the search for Vishal from an unknown man, recorded by Vishal.
He sounded as if he was in his late 90s or early 20s. He did not say that he was a prostitute, but he merely said that he had a lot of information about pedophile rings where politicians and judges, some police officers were involved. He was begging me to take him seriously because he said to me that he had attempted to get in touch with Scotland Yard and they had not taken him seriously at all. I recorded his conversation and then I transferred it to another cassette for my own self and handed the recording to the police.
What the police did was to tell Vishal to ignore it.
About a week later, they came back and said to forget it, there was nothing in it, and they did mention that yes, they knew this guy had tried to contact them, but they didn't believe anything. It was just some crank call.
But now, 33 years later, with the press consumed by stories of a paedophile ring in Westminster and London, centring around the Elm Guesthouse in Barnes, with Vishal saying he was purposefully kept in the dark by police, with potential leads, like the call, not followed up on, he believes this.
It all points to one thing. There must have been a cover-up.
What would it mean to you to get to the bottom of what happened?
It would be in their interest to uncover any cover-up that might have been, irrespective of whether politicians or judges or even the police were involved or not. And they don't only owe this to me and my son, but they do owe it to the public. And it's time.
It is time.
We are on...
Road.
Say again?
Upper Richmond Road here. And that's the East Putney tube station or railway station just on your right here, where Vishal and the nanny and his sister came from Fleet Street, where they'd been to see the royal wedding in their father's offices in Fleet Street. He was a solicitor. I think he'd gone on earlier, but it was the nanny, the little girl and Vishal, and they came out of here, and I think the little girl wanted some sweets, and they crossed the road, and the nanny saw him back across the road and running up Carlton Road here.
Do you mind telling us your name?
Yeah, my name's Jackie Moulton. I was, at the time in 1981, I was a detective sergeant on the inquiry when Vishal went missing.
Jackie was part of a team of detectives led by Inspector James Begg, brought in, she says, pretty much straight away. The case got a huge amount of coverage in the press, with contemporaneous articles saying that Vishal wandered off into the street parties taking place on Royal Wedding Day. But that's just wrong.
No, that's really not the case, and we have to remember in the 1980s there's no CCTV, and as far as we were concerned, the police investigation revealed that the streets were dead. That was the point. There was nobody on the streets, because if there were parties, there's certainly no parties on this street, and then there's these press reports that said, you know, Vishal was meandering through these enormous street parties. Well, as far as we were concerned, there weren't any street parties. And that was the point, nobody saw him, and that's what made it hard. You didn't even have, you prise open a tin of paint and you kind of, with your screwdriver, and you lift it and it just moves. We had nothing, that was the thing. There was just nothing to go on, and that was the really sad thing and frustrating thing, because nobody saw anything.
Nobody saw anything. Remember that. Do you remember in the course of your investigations ever digging up information about a suspect, potential suspect, lead suspect, anything of that nature?
There were some notorious paedophiles that were operating at that time, and they became part of our inquiry. But sadly, we just didn't have a clue, if that makes sense. When I say I didn't have a clue, there were no clues, to go on. That this boy vanished from the streets of London, and nobody saw anything.
To try and tease any leads out, police put a photo of Vishal out to the press and staged a reconstruction. They took the nanny, Vishal's sister, and a lookalike through the last known movements. But Vishamba's dad says there were issues with that.
The photograph that they took of my son, I requested the police, I said, give me a day or two to find a picture of him recently. But they were in a hurry. And then when they did the reconstruction, the boy, he was so tall and so different, and he was, 10 or 11 or 12 years of age.
In fact, the reconstruction went the wrong way, literally walked up the wrong street. The lookalike was anything but, far too tall, much older than Vishal. What then about this phone call that Vishamba took midway through the investigation?
He had a lot of information about paedophile rings, or paedophile ring, where politicians and judges, and I think he even said some police officers were involved.
Was that phone call ever flagged up to you at all?
No, I think the phone call that Mr Malhotra spoke about occurred after I'd left. But what I have said previously, if Mr Malhotra said that he received a phone call, then I'd have no reason to disbelieve him. Yeah. Very honest, honourable man. So, but I wasn't aware of it personally.
He says that he gave it was all set up to record their phone line, because there might be in the potential that he was kidnapped for a ransom, and therefore someone might call. So it was all set up. So he recorded and gave a cassette to the police. Don't know where that is now.
Well, the police would have. We in those days we had a technical department, and who set up those operating recording systems. So
should it still be in existence, as far as you know? Should it still exist somewhere?
I would. What, the tape?
Yeah.
If it was a blank tape, no. Obviously, if it had information on it, yes. But it should be part of that, the missing from home inquiry, because it's still live, although he's not missing from home, because it's obviously been found dead in Sussex. So any information that the Metropolitan Police would have had would have been passed to Sussex as part of their inquiry.
Seems like a straightforward deal. All the information from one investigation passed to another. I contacted Sussex Police about evidence they had for the Malhotra case. They said that their investigation has been reviewed as a matter of standard policy for such unresolved serious crimes. There are no current developments, but of course we would look into any new information that could lead to a new line of inquiry. So far then, a young boy picked up in Putney ends up in a copse in Sussex. The Putney investigation didn't really lead anywhere. That paint tin lid couldn't be jammed open. What then about the Sussex end? This is a recording of a detective at Sussex Police in 1982, a year to the day that Vishal went missing. I'm not 100% certain who the officer is.
Well, as you know, this time last year, when Vishal disappeared, was the week where Goodwood is held, the Goodwood Racing. And it was in the middle of this period last year that Vishal disappeared. Consequently, this year, what we are trying to do is to appeal to any person who attended Goodwood races last year and is attending this year, and indeed who travelled past Alder Copse on the A272 road in Sussex, to come forward.
Alder Copse is a seriously remote area of trees off the A272, pretty much between Petersfield and Rowgate. It's an unremarkable spot. Nevertheless, it pricks the interest of one former detective.
Where the body was found of Vishal, I found quite interesting because Rowgate is a beautiful part of West Sussex, and he was found in marshland on the edge of some farmland, I think, by men who were shooting pigeons. You know, I don't think that that's just a random place to put a body. So a Sussex connection would be of interest to me. And also I understand, I don't know whether it's true or not, but somebody had seen a very rare Lancia car with a young boy, which obviously there weren't many of those rare Lancias at that time, and I would have thought that would have been quite easy to trace.
It's true that there were reports of a Lancia car parked at a funny angle in a lay-by next to Alder Copse on the day of the royal wedding. Apparently Sussex police put a potential witness under hypnotherapy to try to make them remember the number plate. It didn't work. So no leads, no suspects, no nothing. The paint tin lid remains shut. There were plenty of people ringing the Met Police to say they'd seen Vishal. Newspapers reporting on the story at the time say once Vishal's picture was put on telly, they received 200 apparent sightings. They couldn't all be right. One sighting police did take seriously was Rita Greer's. This is the first time she's spoken about what she saw. Rita was with her husband on the day of the royal wedding in 1981. They were having lunch at her workplace in Putney with her boss and his wife. They watched the procession on the TV.
About 4 o'clock or something, my husband and I cleared everything up. We decided we'd go out for a little toddle in the streets because there's a huge, fantastic atmosphere. Everybody was celebrating. It was wonderful. And there's flags up everywhere and people having a good time.
The couple walked out of the back of the factory, crossing over Putney Bridge Road and into Deoda Road. On Deoda Road is a set of stairs leading up to a footbridge which crosses the Thames. You can walk over the bridge to Putney Bridge Station.
When I went up onto the steps with my husband, there was this boy standing at the bottom of the steps and all on his own. I thought, that's a bit odd. Anyway, we stayed looking over at the sea and the water, and, you know, then we came back down. He was still there. Now, when I came down...
How long had you been there for?
Oh, probably just about 5 minutes, just looking at the water and the boats and things like that. When I came down, he was eating a bar of chocolate, this child, and he had his head back. And, well, I used to be a teacher, and when children have been naughty and they've done something they shouldn't have done, they've got a different body language. They don't quite know how to be normal. They're very restless. And he had his arms up in the air. He was eating this bar of chocolate with his head right back.
When you say he had his arms up, just describe that for me.
If you can imagine, he's standing there and his elbows are up. He's got the chocolate bar in his mouth. I remember it had an orange wrapper with a silver on the inside. And it wasn't a crunchy bar, but it was that type of chocolate bar, you know, quite a big one. And he got that in his mouth. He's holding that up with one hand, and he got the other arm up in the air, so the elbow was up in the air. And I thought, I don't know, it's a bit strange. He was a bit odd, you know. He didn't seem to fit in what was going on at the time. Anyway, you know, everybody was sort of celebrating, and there was this boy on his own, and he looked a bit uncomfortable, I have to say.
So you think he might have been concerned, worried, just not quite fitting in?
Well, that's when I got the idea perhaps he was waiting for somebody. You know, it was a bit disturbing, unsettling, really. I mean, there's everybody around having a great time. There's flags everywhere and bunting and people having a great time and laughing and joking, wandering about. There's this child on his own. It was so odd because he was, you know, everybody else, all the other children with their families.
Strange. Even stranger was that Rita, walking past this boy twice, once on the way up, once on the way down, seeing him eat a chocolate bar, looking slightly out of place, a bit awkward, a bit distressed, noticed one other thing.
I saw he'd got these extraordinary teeth. The two incisors, they just look like fangs.
This is important. The picture put out of Vishal by police didn't show his teeth. Why? Because police would be able to ask any of the potential 200 witnesses about a distinguishing feature, a feature you could only know if you'd seen him. After the TV news began reporting Vishal's disappearance, Rita rang the police who came to interview her, and she gave them the description of the teeth.
They looked at each other, sort of gave a darting look to each other, and one of them said, "Hallelujah."
An indication that they felt that
I had actually seen the right, it was him.
What did you think?
I thought, oh my God, it was him.
Rita was interviewed a number of times and then taken back to Deoda Road.
I had to walk with them and do exactly the trip I'd taken on that day. And when we came to the footbridge, in the gutter was the wrapper from the bar of chocolate.
And the police picked that up?
No, because in those days they didn't do DNA. It wasn't known in those days, it's so long ago.
So they left it?
It was left there, yes. I dream about it sometimes, just seeing him by the bottom of the footbridge. And, I don't know, it kind of haunts me a bit, really. I shall always be guilty that I didn't go and ask him if he was all right.
In the end, police thanked Rita for her time. She never heard from them again. Rita was one person in around 200 who said they saw Vishal in London. Her account was clearly taken seriously. Others were dismissed quite quickly, but some weren't followed up by police at all. In the late afternoon of the royal wedding, Jill Exelby was travelling by train to Balham to see her daughter, who was in hospital. Jill's family got in touch with me after they heard the interview on LBC with Vishal's dad. Jill, they say, was 100% certain she saw Vishal on that train. Sadly, Jill died just before Christmas last year, but she told her family everything she saw. Her granddaughter, Paige, tells the story.
It's very much hung over the family's head for quite a number of years. She got on the train, normal journey, until she was about to get off, basically, at Balham. She was watching this little boy running up and down the train, very excited, feet up on the chairs, constantly running about, smiling, laughing, and she noticed the bright white trainers with a blue flash.
The trainers. That's key. Rita says she couldn't remember the specific colour of the trainers, but for a striking blue flash in that they were brand new. The press reports at the time are conflicting about what colour the trainers were. Blue, black, white, all described in the articles. Vishamba says...
The white trainers, yes. The blue flash doesn't ring a bell at all. It may have been a blue stripe.
Flash or stripe, blue is there. And they were white and they were new. Jill told her family that she was in the carriage with the boy, another woman and a scruffy-looking man. Later that night, Jill watched the television and saw the picture of Vishal on the news.
Well, she knew straight away that it was him. As soon as she saw the child on the news, she knew it was the boy she'd seen, and she got my granddad to call the police straight away and give them the information that she knew, which was that he was wearing white trainers with a blue flash, and they said straight away that that information hasn't been given to the public yet, and that's what we have. So somebody will be out to see you, which they never was.
So your mum rang the police, she described what she saw, the police said, yes, that's information that we've got but we haven't made public, so it would tally. The police said we'd come out to you, and it never happened.
Yeah, correct, it never happened. We called a number of other times, and they said that they would be out, but they never did.
Odd. But like with the teeth, it could have been that police withheld that distinguishing feature. But why say it's accurate and then do nothing? Years passed. Jill, watching the TV news, sees a picture of a man being sentenced for paedophilia, and it made her jump. because she recognised him.
Leslie Bailey was in the news. He came up on the news being arrested for a different case. And as soon as my nan saw him on the TV, my nan straight away, that was him, that's the man that was on the train with the little boy. And it was straight away, she knew it was years later, and for her to know that that was him from a photograph years later, it was definite, she knew it was him.
Leslie Bailey was sentenced for the murder and abuse of children. He was part of a gang convicted. He was himself killed in prison in 1993. Paige says her grandmother reported her sighting to the police, but again heard nothing. This is where I get a little cynical. A woman, through a second-hand description, says she saw the boy with a paedophile on the train in the late afternoon he went missing. Given we know Vishal went missing in Putney, it's a long journey to get from there to the Northern Line down to Balham in that time frame. That notwithstanding, it's hard to know whether Leslie Bailey was in or out of prison at that time, and if she reported that to the police, why did they not follow it up? Vishamba agrees.
I'm not convinced at all that it was Vishal because of the photograph of Vishal which the police were putting out and the reconstruction that they did. It would have misled anybody to think that a child could have been Vishal because, in my opinion, none of these add up at all. It doesn't make sense.
So can we disprove it? Can we say categorically that this wasn't Bailey or Vishal? Harder to prove it wasn't Vishal, given police don't know his movements, but easier to find out whether it could have been Leslie Bailey, whether he was in or out of prison at that time. So things are finally starting to move forward. In the last episode, you heard from 2 potential witnesses. We also flagged them up to Sussex Police, who conducted the original murder investigation. They had said to us from day one that they would review Vishal's case based on new evidence. Well, given that the XLB family had never been spoken to by police, did that constitute new evidence? A few days later, Vishal's dad, Vishamba, got a call.
In fact, I believe it was thanks to you that the Sussex Police phoned me up and said that they would like to have a meeting.
2 officers met with Mr. Mehrotra, and yes, they would review the case.
He confirmed that they were here because of media pressure, and they were also, he also said that he had 22 boxes, and he said that it would take him at least a year to get to review this.
22 boxes of evidence available, including potentially the phone call Vishamba says he took, which is good, but there's more. So I am outside the Met Police's offices in Earl's Court. It's a bit like Scotland Yard, but probably slightly less famous. I've been asked to come here to hand over some audio and give it to both the Met and the detective who is reviewing Vishal's case at Sussex Police, because it looks like it might be helpful to them. It's a conversation I had with a man called Roger Stoodley. He was the lead detective on Operation Orchid, which was set up in the late 80s, and looked into the disappearance of young boys and the activities of a very notorious paedophile gang, a gang which included people like Sidney Cook and Leslie Bailey. I was asking him really to see whether it was possible that Leslie Bailey could have been on that train on the royal wedding day, given he was in and out of prison at the time. What I ended up finding out has led me here. So here's the conversation with Roger Stoodley that I'm about to give to the police, and that started with him explaining what Operation Orchid was all about.
So it ran for about 4 years as a result of information coming from prison from an informant that a number of men from the East End had killed up to 12 young men in the course of sexual assaults. The perpetrators were in the main known to us from previous investigations conducted in the East End and with Essex Police. So we had a head start in identifying them. Our problem was to identify the victims.
The evidence for these claims, Roger said, came from a prison informant who was sharing a cell with Leslie Bailey and Sidney Cook. The men, along with Stephen Barrell and Robert Oliver, who were also convicted for the killing of 14-year-old Jason Swift, were apparently bragging about other crimes they'd committed, other lives they'd taken. The informant took details of 12 boys the men said they'd killed and gave them to the police.
I started on the premise that 12 was an unlikely number. I thought it was too high to have gone unnoticed. And I think initially we tried to disprove that number and tried to cut it down to a realistic figure. But during the course of the inquiries, it transpired that a large number of young boys had gone missing throughout the country. A lot of them were identified and found. Some were unidentified and never identified.
The informant was able to help the police focus their search for the victims. He provided the police with all the information he could, including drawing maps of where Bailey said bodies were buried. The informant was so appalled by what he was hearing that he even asked police to prolong his time in prison in order to gain more information. There's a report that after sharing a cell with one of the gang, he wrote in a letter to the police saying, "I cannot relate the fear I feel for children everywhere, while this man laughs and squeals in delight as he tells me of the things he has done and the things he intends to do in the future." And when you were investigating the number 12, be it that you were trying to knock that number down because you felt it was too high already, did the name Vishal Malhotra ever come up?
It's not as a result of that. The name did come up as a result of our inquiries. We were obviously collecting the names of missing people, and his name came up, but we found no connection.
Just another name on a long list of boys around the country who had gone missing. Operation Orchid did, though, have some success, if success is the right word. Stoodley and his team were able to convict the gang for the killing of 2 more boys.
Mark Tilsey was just seduced at the fair at Wokingham by Sidney Cook with a promise of sweets, and he was taken off to be indecently assaulted and ultimately killed as a result of that. Barry Lewis in South London, we don't know. He was just taken very quickly off the streets in a matter of minutes and taken to Hackney, where he was again abused and killed.
Boys lured with sweets picked up off the streets in the blink of an eye. The work Roger and his Operation Orchid team did resulted in Leslie Bailey's conviction for the murders of both Mark Tilsley, who was 7, and Barry Lewis, who was 6. The bodies were found disturbed in shallow graves out in the countryside. Bailey himself was murdered in prison, strangled in his cell in 1993. So what about Leslie Bailey being on that train on the day of the royal wedding? Could we now rule that out completely?
I wouldn't think it was highly likely. I can't say it wasn't likely because we didn't obviously establish everything they'd done in their criminality, which could expose it to being incorrect, and he could have been involved. But I would have said still that it's highly unlikely.
We can't be sure, but we can be close to sure. So why the need to hand this interview to the police? Well, given that the informant had said 12 victims, which Roger said he was trying to whittle down, the police only found 3, which leaves a lot of potential victims still out there. And then there's this.
The informant who was in prison with Bailey and the others had recorded the fact that they said that an Asian lad had been involved and was likely to be one of the victims.
An Asian boy, aged, Roger says, somewhere between 8 and 14, linked by an informant to a gang already known to have kidnapped and murdered boys, but who the police were never able to identify. What speaks to me through this is, even though you don't have any formal evidence of a link between this group and Vishal, you've got an informant saying that there was spotted with an Indian boy, which you said may be between the range of 8 and 14. You've got a gang who operates by encouraging people or these boys to go to have sweets or eat sweets and then taking them off the streets very, very quickly.
Certainly.
Same as in Vishal. The body was found in a shallow grave somewhere on a very small copse somewhere in the countryside that was then disturbed by animal activity potentially.
Oh, there's certainly similarities.
Could this Asian boy have been Vishal? And could the police have followed it up more? These are questions that we can now confirm on the basis of this interview that the police watchdog are now asking. Operation Orchid is now being investigated by the Independent Police Complaints Commission. When I found this out, I rang Vishal. He said it's huge progress.
I was very pleasantly surprised because it seems that somebody is taking things a bit seriously for the first time after 33 years.
He's right. The Met are putting more and more resources to working on this case. Progress is being made. We're getting somewhere. On Sunday the 21st of February 1982, two brothers, Basil and Roy Collins, were on a pigeon shoot around Alder Copse in Sussex. Their shoot was cut short when they found the skeletal remains of a young boy. The shallow grave he was buried in had been disturbed by animals. The two men were interviewed by Sussex police, who began house-to-house inquiries. Both Basil and Roy died some time ago. I did speak to Basil's wife. She didn't want to talk, but she said the whole incident had affected her husband very badly, that it had haunted him for the rest of his life. The huge police operation in Sussex got going, but found nothing. They arrested 5 or 6 unidentified people, interviewed a witness who says they saw 2 men throw a sack over a fence near to where the body was found, and police found a pair of size 10 shoes in a bog near to the body. Nothing came of it. Another witness was given hypnotherapy to try and remember the number plate of a Lancia car he saw parked at a funny angle in the lay-by next to where Vishal was found. It didn't work. No significant suspects were ever identified. By the end of January 1983, the incident rooms in Putney, where the Met were working, and in Chichester, where Sussex police were working, were scaled down. The case officially went cold. I did track down one of the senior officers involved in the Sussex operation, and he said some strange things. He said they never arrested anyone, that the Met never told them anything about a tape, or that they had looked into known paedophiles. In fact, this officer told me they'd never considered a sexual motive at all when investigating the case. Which is odd. In fact, lots that has happened since 1983 at Sussex Police regarding this case is pretty odd. In 2001, the Force began a review of a number of cold cases. In the press at the time, there are reports saying that the police would look into the Vishal's death and the original investigation, that police would go back over all the material, all the evidence, to see if anything new could be brought to light. That review was carried out by Dave Gaylor.
The initial process is to try and track down and identify all the paperwork, all the exhibits that might still exist. That's quite a long process, and that was really the starting point, and would be the starting point for any review. See what you've got, and then actually go through every single document. Documents, from what I could gather, may have well existed in a number of police stations. There would have been inquiries to be carried out with the Forensic Science Service, who were going through a process of change. So exhibits may have been at more than one laboratory, if they still existed. So that would have been the process to begin with.
A process that would take a good deal of time. Detective Gaylor therefore rang Vishal.
I thought it was right and proper to ring the boy's father and just said to him, this is what the process is, this is what we will be doing, and in due course we will be in touch with you.
Except they never were, because the review, publicised in the press, highlighted to the father of a murdered boy, never happened. So how long did it take you then to gather all the paperwork?
It didn't, because actually I was moved on before that process started. I was never in a position to actually sit down anywhere and start looking at what existed.
Why weren't you in that position? What happened to change that?
I was moved from the job I was doing to another job.
So you're saying that you literally spent, 24 hours looking into it?
Yeah.
Detective Gaylor went on to another department. The review never happened. A hard thing to then tell Vishal's dad that the review hadn't even started, let alone found anything new. Well, it would have been hard to tell him. Had Sussex Police done so?
No such contact took place.
Years pass. In 2005, another review begins. Again, Vishal is told about it, but again hears nothing. In fact, no one hears anything, because the outcome of the review is kept secret. Until now. And after reading the 22 heavily redacted pages, it leaves Vishal feeling like this.
Well, I honestly feel that the police have let me down very, very badly. I cannot see anything in this report to give me any sense of comfort that they have done their job thoroughly or properly, or in any event, they have not caught anybody in 33 years, not even remotely coming close to it. So when they make a statement at the very beginning, when it says, despite extensive inquiries by both Sussex and the Metropolitan Police, there were no significant suspects identified by either of the investigations. Both services were unable to ascertain when, how, where, or why Vishal died. And yet, the rest of the document seems to suggest that there is a very clear direction that the police were taking, namely that he must have been murdered by a paedophile gang or some individual, and that there was a direct correlation between the two.
On the one hand, it suggests there was no chance of any suspects ever being identified, let alone in 1982, yet goes on to suggest re-interviewing or interviewing, presumably for the first time, at least 6 people. Their names are redacted. Vishal talks about a very clear direction that the police were taking, and the direction of travel seems to head directly towards Sidney Cook. In 1986, 1998, and a third unspecified date, the Met, Sussex and Thames Valley Police looked at connections between the murders of Jason Swift, Barry Lewis and Mark Tilsley, all of whom were killed by Cook and his gang, and Vishal. Files were requested from Sussex by Thames Valley Police, exhibits asked for by the Met's paedophile squad, reports on the 4 boys and the connections between their murders sent between the forces. And on each of the 3 occasions, this is the concluding line.
There are no follow-up reports or letters as to how the situation was left or to be resolved.
In their own words, the Met said in 1998 that there were strong similarities between the boys killed by Cook and his gang, particularly Jason Swift, and Vishal's murder. One can't help but get the feeling at every time the police try and look for connections between Sidney Cook's gang and your son's murder, something stops.
Well, that is obvious to me.
So, here are the things we know. We know a report of a woman apparently seeing Vishal on the train with one of Cook's gang members says it was never looked into by police. We know that the informant, whose information led to the gang being convicted of killing 3 boys, said an Asian boy had been described as a victim. We know that 3 times since 1982 police have looked at links between Cook and Vishal, with no conclusion ever reported. We know that this gang worked as fairground staff to lure boys away, and we know, through this report, that fairgrounds were in operation in Putney on the afternoon Vishal went missing. Do you think there's a point here at which we say those links now need to be looked at?
Well, it's always better late than never because I need closure. The connections are there, and you'll have made the connections, and it is their duty now to make sure that they do a thorough investigation and try and find the truth and to reopen the case. It is not right that I should continue to live with this for the rest of my life.
Over the last 5 weeks, we've exposed links to this gang. They are there in black and white. And yet when police begin to pursue those links, files close. Reports go missing from case papers. Interest stops. And Vishal is left wondering still, what happened to his son?
I'm not looking for any sympathy from anybody, but I do want the truth.